The station had no end, or so it seemed. Corridors twisted and turned like a maze, stretching across levels that floated in zero gravity. Lights flickered faintly in some areas, while neon panels glowed in alien colors in others. Ships from countless star systems docked at the massive interstellar station, carrying creatures of every imaginable shape and size. Yet among all this life, Jan the janitor moved quietly, unnoticed. Jan was human, a species now considered minor by most civilizations. His uniform was plain, gray, and unremarkable. It did not announce him as anyone important. In fact, that was exactly how he wanted it. A simple life, simple work, and no attention. But there was something about him that no one knew, something hidden, a mark on the back of his neck, normally covered by his uniform collar. A tattoo. Intricate and strange, from a time long before anyone in this station was born. He pushed his mop down the corridor, the soft swish of water the only sound in that section. Above, monitors blinked and reported on everything from ship arrivals to energy readings. Aliens moved past him in a hurry, carrying cases, tools, or strange devices. Many were tall, with skin that shimmered in patterns he couldn't describe. Some had multiple arms, others had wings or tails, and a few floated entirely above the floor. But not one of them looked at him. He passed without notice, invisible to all but the most observant. Jan liked it that way. Being invisible gave him freedom. He saw things others missed, overheard things they thought were private, and learned patterns that might save lives one day. No one knew. But Jan had spent years quietly observing the station, watching how people and aliens moved, acted, and sometimes schemed. He stopped at the control room entrance, his mop dripping onto the floor. A small creature with translucent skin and bright green eyes peeked out. "Morning, Jan," it squeaked in a melodic voice. Jan nodded without speaking. Words were unnecessary. The creature scurried off, leaving him to his work. Jan reached a corridor that smelled faintly of burnt metal. The lights flickered more here, and he sighed softly. He would have to fix a panel later. Not his official duty, but someone needed to. He knelt, unscrewed the panel with a tool he kept hidden in his pocket, and began to inspect the wiring. Sparks hissed slightly, and he muttered under his breath, his hands moving with careful precision. A pair of aliens walked past him. One had skin like liquid silver, the other's eyes glowed faintly red. "Don't touch that," said the silver-skinned one. Jan didn't look up. "It's safe," he said quietly. The silver one frowned but didn't argue. They walked on. Jan finished the repair, tightened the panel, and stood up. No thanks came, no acknowledgement, just the usual silence of being invisible. But that didn't bother him. He wasn't invisible to the station itself. The station noticed. Its sensors, its lights, and its systems obeyed his careful touch. As he moved down another hallway, Jan noticed a group of aliens arguing. Their voices rose and fell in strange tones, some shrill, some low. One held a device that pulsed softly, while another gestured wildly with its 3 hands. Jan stopped a moment, leaning against the wall, listening. He didn't need to intervene. Just observing was enough. He recognized the pattern. A disagreement over a shipment that had gone missing, a mistake that could have bigger consequences if left unresolved. He shook his head slightly and continued, cleaning as he went. No one noticed, of course. They never did. Jan had learned to blend into the background, a skill that required patience and careful attention. The station was full of drama, politics, and conflicts, but he moved through it all quietly. Jan entered the large docking area, where ships of every kind landed and took off. The hum of engines, the hiss of airlocks, and the chatter of hundreds of species filled the air. He navigated between crates and moving machinery, making his way to a small corner near the observation deck. Here, he could pause and watch without being noticed. Humans were rare in these parts. Most species viewed them as fragile, easily overlooked and unimportant. Jan was used to it, but humans had a persistence that others did not. They adapted, learned, and survived in ways that surprised even the most advanced species. Jan's mind often wandered to those thoughts as he worked. Survival was not about strength or technology alone. It was about patience, observation, and timing. A sudden alarm made him jump slightly. Red lights flashed, and a robotic voice echoed through the corridors. "Warning! Energy flux detected, level 3 containment breach." Jan's heart didn't race. He had seen enough emergencies to know the drill. Most beings panicked, but he moved calmly, heading toward the source. He reached a side corridor where the lights flickered and the temperature seemed to drop. A maintenance drone hovered nearby, sparks flying from its damaged circuits. Jan knelt, opened a small panel on the drone, and quickly rerouted power to stabilize it. The drone buzzed and hummed, functioning again. He straightened, brushing his hands off, and continued toward the main observation area. The breach was small, localized, but dangerous if ignored. Jan arrived at the scene to find a group of aliens arguing with station security. The humans of the station were mostly staff like him, few and unnoticed. Aliens shouted over one another, none of them noticing Jan step forward, quietly examining the control panel that had triggered the alarm. A flicker of recognition passed in the eyes of one alien engineer. They leaned forward to speak, but Jan already fixed the misalignment in the system. Lights returned to normal, and the alarm silenced. "System stable," he said softly. No one acknowledged him. They continued their argument, oblivious. Jan walked away, dusting his hands, and returned to his cleaning duties. To most, he was still just the janitor. But in moments like this, he carried the knowledge and skill to save lives quietly, without recognition. Jan paused at a reflective surface along the corridor. He wiped it clean as he glanced down, and for a brief moment, the collar of his uniform shifted. The tattoo on his neck caught the light, a series of intricate lines and symbols, unmistakably human, yet ancient. No one saw it. He adjusted his collar and moved on. The secret he carried was safe, for now. By mid-shift, Jan had covered most of the lower levels of the station. Floors were clean, minor malfunctions repaired, and hazards removed. He moved past alien merchants, wandering traders, and engineers, all of them focused on their work. Not one paused to notice him. Jan didn't mind. He found purpose in quiet service. He found satisfaction in being the silent guardian of the station, the one who saw what others missed, who noticed the small details that could prevent disasters. And one day, he thought, when the right moment came, the station would know. Humans were underestimated at their own risk. As he prepared to mop the final corridor before the end of his shift, Jan heard a faint whisper in the air. Not words exactly, but a pattern of sound that drew his attention. He paused. A small drone zipped by, carrying a package incorrectly labeled. If it continued on its path, it could cause a spill, damaging supplies vital to the station's operations. Jan moved swiftly. He intercepted the drone, carefully adjusting its course. It zipped away unharmed, delivering its cargo safely. Another quiet act, unnoticed by anyone but the station itself. He smiled faintly. It was strange, he thought, how the station seemed to recognize his work more than the beings who walked its halls. The day wore on. Jan moved through the corridors, a ghost among 1,000 living beings. His eyes caught small details, a crack in the floor tile, a flickering light, an alien child dropping a toy. He repaired, adjusted, and ensured safety quietly. No applause, no thanks, just the work itself. As the station's artificial day drew to a close, Jan paused in the observation deck. Outside, stars stretched across the void, ships moving gracefully between docking bays. He leaned on the railing, his thoughts drifting to distant Earth. a planet now long gone but remembered in fragments and stories. The tattoo on his neck itched slightly under his collar, a reminder of heritage, of a past that no one here understood. Jan sighed. He would continue his work tomorrow, just as he had today. Invisible, ignored, underestimated, but ready, always ready. One day, the station would see the truth, and when that day came, Jan would be prepared. For now, he turned and walked back into the maze of corridors, mop in hand, eyes open, mind sharp, and heart patient. The human janitor was quiet, small, and overlooked. But that was only until the right moment. The next day began like any other on the station. The corridors buzzed with the footsteps of thousands of aliens, some rushing to their duties, others lingering to exchange goods or gossip. Jan moved quietly along the familiar paths, mop in hand, quietly cleaning as he went. No one noticed him, just as he preferred. The anonymity allowed him to watch and learn, and today he had a sense that something unusual was brewing. He passed a cluster of alien engineers arguing over a panel that controlled the docking bays. Sparks flew from the machinery, and one of the engineers' many arms gestured wildly. Jan didn't stop. It wasn't his place to interfere yet. He had learned long ago that timing was everything. A small misstep from an outsider could escalate problems unnecessarily. Instead, he watched, noting patterns, memorizing details that would matter later. While he worked, he overheard snippets of conversations. Aliens complained about missing shipments. Others whispered about strange energy fluctuations in the lower levels. The rogue faction from previous incidents seemed to have left traces, though no one knew who or what was responsible. Jan quietly cataloged the information, storing it in his mind. No one paid attention, but he noticed everything. By mid-morning, he reached a corridor near the cargo bays. Here, the hum of machinery was loud and the smell of oil and metal filled the air. A small crate had been knocked askew, its contents exposed, delicate supplies meant for medical units. An alien child hovered nearby, fascinated by the glowing objects. Without a sound, Jan moved in, adjusting the crate and making sure the child was safe. The aliens supervising the area did not even glance in his direction. They were too busy arguing over the shipment logs. Jan paused for a moment and wiped the sweat from his brow. His uniform was plain, and he carried no special tools except for a small device tucked in his pocket, a multi-purpose gadget of his own design. It could repair, detect, and analyze things with precision, though no one knew he had it. In these moments he felt both powerful and invisible, a paradox he had grown used to over the years. As he continued, he noticed a faint vibration in the floor, one almost imperceptible. It was a pattern he had seen before, an irregular pulse in the station's energy grid. Most would dismiss it as a minor fluctuation, but Jan's mind flagged it. Energy patterns did not behave randomly. Something or someone was manipulating them. He followed the vibrations silently, moving through narrow maintenance tunnels where no one else dared to go. The tunnels were dark, lit only by emergency strips of orange light. Shadows danced across the walls, and the sound of distant machinery echoed eerily. Jan moved cautiously, keeping his presence minimal. His eyes caught a small panel that had been tampered with. Wires were out of place, circuits scorched slightly. Someone had tried to sabotage the station again. He frowned. The rogue faction's work was far from finished. Jan knelt and examined the panel, his fingers moving with practiced precision. The design was unfamiliar, unlike anything used by standard station maintenance. He traced the circuitry, rewiring and correcting the damage. Sparks hissed, but the panel stabilized. Another quiet success. No one would know it had ever been broken. When he stood, he noticed a group of aliens observing him from a distance. Their expressions were curious but cautious. Jan adjusted his collar slightly, hiding the tattoo on the back of his neck. The human mark, intricate and ancient, still remained a secret. The aliens murmured among themselves, but none approached him. Some instinct told them this human was unusual, though they could not say why. Jan moved on, returning to his regular tasks, cleaning floors, repairing minor machinery, and monitoring the station for anomalies. But the sense of unease lingered. Something bigger was coming, he could feel it. The rogue faction was no longer just a rumor. Their actions were deliberate, calculated, and potentially dangerous. Jan's quiet observations had become more than a pastime. They were preparation. Later in the day, Jan entered the central hub, a massive open space where ships docked and passengers moved freely. Aliens of every kind crowded the area. A merchant shouted prices. A trader bargained over rare minerals, and somewhere in the crowd, a tall figure with silver skin whispered into a communication device. Jan moved along the periphery, unnoticed as always, but observing. He recognized subtle gestures and signals, patterns that suggested coordination and planning. Near one docking bay, a small group of aliens struggled to move a crate. Jan stepped forward silently, lifting one end and easing it into place. "Careful," he said softly, though his voice barely carried. The aliens turned briefly, surprised, but quickly returned to their work. Jan moved on before they could question him. Helping was easy. Recognition was not necessary. As evening approached, a strange commotion erupted near the lower levels. Alarms rang softly, signaling a minor breach. Jan hurried down the corridors, following the source of the disturbance. When he arrived, he saw a panel had been forced open, wires exposed, and a small energy leak forming. The rogue faction's work was continuing, and this time, it was deliberate. Jan knelt to repair the panel, his fingers moving quickly, reconnecting wires, rerouting power, and stabilizing the energy flow. Sparks flew, and the air hissed with released pressure, but Jan worked steadily, methodically. The aliens supervising the area panicked slightly, unsure of how to handle the situation. Jan ignored them, focused on the task. Within moments, the panel hummed steadily, and the leak vanished. One of the alien supervisors finally noticed him. "Who? What are you?" it asked, voice trembling. Jan didn't answer. He simply adjusted his collar, hiding the tattoo, and walked away. The supervisor blinked, unsure what to make of the human who had fixed a dangerous breach with no tools, no recognition, and no question. Later, in a quieter part of the station, Jan paused to rest. He leaned against a railing overlooking the docking area, watching ships come and go. His mind worked through patterns he had seen throughout the day. Every incident, every small sabotage, was part of a larger plan. The rogue faction was coordinating attacks, testing weaknesses, and seeking advantage. Most of the station's inhabitants were blind to it, distracted by routine or self-interest. But Jan saw it all. The tattoo on his neck itched slightly under the collar. A reminder of who he was, of the knowledge and lineage he carried. Humans were underestimated across the galaxy, seen as fragile or simple, but that had never been true. Humans had endurance, intelligence, and resilience unmatched by many. Jan's quiet strength was just one example of the potential most beings refused to see. A small creature approached him, a bright-eyed alien child carrying a floating device that beeped incessantly. Jan smiled faintly. "Be careful," he said, taking the device gently and resetting its circuits so it would work properly. The child stared at him in wonder, then scampered off. For a brief moment, someone had noticed him. Not fully, not in the way that mattered, but enough to make Jan smile. Jan moved toward the observation deck, seeking a vantage point. From here, he could see the station's full scale. Ships docking, cargo moving, and beings of every kind interacting in complex ways. Patterns emerged in the chaos, and Jan noted every one of them. The rogue faction's movements, hidden among routine operations, were becoming clearer, and he knew that soon, action would be required. Observation alone would not be enough. As he cleaned the observation deck, Jan's mind wandered briefly to his past. The tattoo on his neck was more than decoration. It was a symbol, a mark of a lineage tied to ancient human pioneers who had once explored the stars. Few remembered those times. Fewer understood the significance. But Jan carried that legacy quietly, ready for the moment it would be needed. Evening shifted to night according to the station's artificial schedule. Lights dimmed slightly, and a calm settled over some of the corridors. Jan continued his rounds, methodical and silent. He passed groups of aliens preparing to rest, cleaning crews finishing their shifts, and security personnel patrolling aimlessly. No one paid him attention. That invisibility, while frustrating to some, was his greatest advantage. It allowed him to act when others could not. As he neared the lower levels, he noticed a strange energy reading on a handheld scanner. The device, one he had modified himself, beeped softly. The pattern was irregular, familiar. Sabotage. Someone was attempting something more significant than before. Jan's heart did not race. He felt only focus. He adjusted his collar, hiding the tattoo, and moved toward the source. The corridor ahead was dimly lit, shadows playing across walls and machinery. He could hear faint voices, alien tones mingling in low conversation. They did not notice him approaching. Jan paused, listening carefully. Plans were being made, and they would soon act. Timing, as always, was crucial. He waited silently, understanding every gesture, every inflection, every sound. Finally, he acted. Quick, precise movements allowed him to adjust panels, reroute circuits, and prevent minor catastrophes before they occurred. Sparks flew, alarms threatened to sound, but Jan's hands moved with practiced skill. By the time the group responsible noticed, the danger had passed, unnoticed by everyone except Jan. He straightened, adjusted his collar, and moved away. The station settled into quiet once more. Jan leaned against a wall, observing. No one would know what had happened here. No one would know that a human janitor had prevented disaster again. The rogue faction was clever, but so was he. And the tattoo on his neck remained hidden, a secret reminder of humanity's underestimated power. Jan finished his shift late, exhausted but satisfied. The corridors were clean, the system stabilized, and the station continued its bustling routine without disruption. Humans were overlooked, underestimated, and often dismissed, but Jan knew the truth. One day, that would change. For now, he walked through the quiet corridors, mop in hand, mind alert, and eyes open. The rogue faction was still out there, plotting and scheming. But Jan was ready, patient, observant, unseen, but never powerless. And in the darkness, the tattoo on his neck remained a secret, waiting for the right moment to reveal humanity's hidden strength. The station was alive with movement, as it always was. Ships arrived and departed. Cargo was moved from one dock to another, and beings from hundreds of worlds hurried through the corridors. But today, something felt different. The air seemed tense, as if the station itself sensed danger. Jan moved quietly along the upper levels, mop in hand, eyes scanning every detail. He had felt this before, the subtle warning signals that something was about to go wrong. Earlier in the day, he had intercepted small signs of sabotage, minor energy fluctuations, tampered panels, and disrupted shipments. Nothing catastrophic yet, but he knew it would escalate. He glanced at the back of his collar in a reflective surface. The tattoo on his neck remained hidden, intricate lines and symbols marking his lineage, human explorers long forgotten by most of the galaxy. It had been quiet for years, but now the past it represented might determine the station's survival. He reached a junction near the central hub and paused. A group of alien workers argued heatedly over a shipment. One waved its many arms aggressively, another emitted a low, vibrating sound that resonated through the corridor. Jan listened, observing the subtle gestures that others would miss. The shipment had been redirected, and the pattern suggested it was part of a larger plan. The rogue faction's work was precise, clever, and dangerous. Jan continued down a narrow corridor leading to the lower decks. The lights flickered faintly, casting shadows across the walls. He noticed a panel emitting a weak, irregular glow. Someone had tampered with the energy lines again. He crouched and examined it. Wires had been stripped and rerouted, but not in a crude or careless way. This was intentional, calculated sabotage. As he worked to repair the damage, a pair of beings appeared from the shadows. They were small, agile, and moved with a quiet precision that made them hard to spot. Jan recognized their intent immediately. They were part of the rogue faction. His hands did not stop. He rerouted circuits and stabilized the system while remaining calm and silent. The beings observed for a moment, then moved on, unaware that their sabotage had failed. Jan allowed himself a brief sigh of relief. One small step in preventing a disaster. He straightened and continued down the corridor, his senses alert. The rogue faction would not stop. Their presence was subtle but growing. Small incidents earlier in the day had already tested the station's defenses. Now they were more daring, more confident. Jan knew he could not rely on observation alone. Action would soon be necessary. Reaching the docking control center, he saw that the rogue faction had escalated. Several systems were offline, and alarms flashed red on the panels. Security teams rushed past, uncoordinated and panicked. Jan moved quietly behind them, unnoticed as always. He analyzed the panels, noting the pattern of sabotage. It was a puzzle, one that required precision, timing, and knowledge beyond ordinary station protocols. Jan's fingers moved over the controls with practiced skill. He restored power to several panels, rerouted communications, and stabilized critical systems. Sparks flew from one malfunctioning terminal, but Jan ignored the heat and noise, focusing entirely on the task. He understood patterns, sequences, and timing in a way that others did not. Within moments, key systems returned to normal. A group of aliens finally noticed him. One, a tall figure with skin like polished stone, stared in disbelief. How are you doing this? It asked, voice trembling. Jan did not answer. He adjusted his collar, keeping the tattoo hidden, and continued his work. The alien could only gape as the human calmly repaired what entire teams had failed to fix. While the station began to regain stability, Jan sensed movement behind him. The rogue faction had noticed his presence and was attempting to trap him. He turned slightly, catching a shadow moving across the far wall. Without hesitation, he moved through maintenance tunnels, unseen, using paths that most beings ignored. He knew the station intimately, every corridor, every hidden passage. It was an advantage no one else had. In the shadows, he paused and listened. Voices spoke in low, urgent tones. Plans were being coordinated, instructions passed quietly. He could not fully understand the language, but the intent was clear. They were preparing for a larger attack, one that could cripple the station if left unchecked. Jan's mind raced, calculating possibilities, mapping the likely targets. The docking bays, energy systems, and life support units were all vulnerable. He moved to a secondary control room, smaller and less conspicuous. From here, he could access emergency overrides and monitor multiple systems simultaneously. The rogue faction would not suspect a human janitor here. Jan accessed the controls, rerouting power to stabilize critical areas, locking doors to prevent intrusion, and activating automated safety protocols. His hands worked quickly, efficiently, and silently. While he worked, he recalled the history behind the tattoo on his neck. It was not merely decorative. It was a symbol of human ingenuity and courage. Humans had explored the stars long before most species now living on the station had existed. They had faced danger, adversity, and the unknown. That legacy lived within him, in his skills, his mind, and his patience. One day it would be revealed, and the galaxy would understand that humans were far from weak. Suddenly, an alert flashed across the panel. A rogue faction operative had breached the docking bay. Jan acted instantly. He accessed the security controls, sealing doors and rerouting power to lock the intruder out. But the being was clever, using an override device to bypass the system. Jan's mind raced. He needed to trap the intruder without causing a catastrophic overload. He activated a secondary channel, diverting power from non-critical systems to isolate the intruder. The doors hissed shut, and the corridor filled with a controlled pulse of energy, enough to disable the rogue operative temporarily without harm. Jan moved quickly, neutralizing the threat, then returned to monitoring the rest of the station. As he worked, other minor incidents erupted across the station: panicked crews, flickering lights, and malfunctioning equipment. Each one was a test from the rogue faction, a way to weaken defenses and create chaos. Jan moved between them, unnoticed, repairing, stabilizing, and observing. He was the quiet force that kept the station from collapsing. Hours passed. The station began to stabilize, but the rogue faction was not done. They had coordinated a major attempt on the central power grid. Jan knew the consequences. A failure could plunge the station into darkness, endangering thousands of lives. He moved swiftly, using hidden maintenance corridors to reach the central hub before the sabotage could take effect. The panel was damaged, wires exposed and sparking. A small device had been planted to overload the system. Jan knelt, analyzing the device. It was sophisticated, designed to bypass standard safety protocols. His hands worked quickly, cutting, rerouting, and stabilizing circuits. Sparks flew dangerously close to his face, but he ignored them. Precision and focus were all that mattered. With a final adjustment, the device was neutralized and the power grid stabilized. Alarms ceased, lights returned to normal, and the station's systems hummed steadily once more. Jan leaned back slightly, catching his breath. He had prevented disaster again, unseen and unacknowledged, as always. Then, a voice called out behind him, different from the others. "Stop! Human!" Jan turned slowly. The rogue faction operative from earlier had returned, attempting a direct confrontation. Jan did not panic. He had anticipated this. The corridor was narrow, limiting the intruder's movement, giving him an advantage despite the being's skill. The operative lunged and Jan sidestepped with calm precision. A brief struggle ensued, physical but controlled. Jan's human strength, while underestimated by most, was enough when combined with his knowledge of the station and timing. He disarmed the intruder, neutralized the device they carried, and secured them safely without harm. Breathing steadily, Jan adjusted his collar, the tattoo on his neck still hidden. The operative stared at him, a mix of fear and disbelief in its eyes. Jan spoke softly. "You underestimated humans." The words were simple, but the meaning was profound. The being did not respond, only realized too late that its perception had been flawed. By the time security teams arrived, Jan had already returned to his cleaning duties. He mopped the corridor as if nothing had happened. The intruder was taken into custody, systems were restored, and the station slowly returned to normal activity. Yet, no one knew the truth. No one saw the quiet heroism, the calm skill, the human who had prevented chaos through observation, intelligence, and action. Jan paused near a reflective panel, briefly catching a glimpse of his neck. The tattoo, still hidden, seemed to pulse slightly under the light, as if acknowledging the day's events. It was a reminder that humans, often underestimated and overlooked, carried potential far beyond what others believed. Patience, observation, and intelligence were as much weapons as strength or technology. As the artificial night of the station approached, John moved through the corridors, ensuring minor malfunctions were corrected and hazards removed. Ships continued to dock, aliens continued their routines, and yet the station felt more stable. Jan's quiet vigilance had preserved it from disaster. He paused in a small observation room, looking out at the stars. The galaxy was vast, full of life, danger, and opportunity. Humans were few, often dismissed, but they endured. And sometimes, as today had shown, they made the difference between disaster and safety. Jan reflected on the events. The rogue faction had tested the station's defenses, probing weaknesses and creating small crises. Most beings had been blind to it, focused on their tasks or distracted by routine, but Jan had seen. He had acted, and he would continue to act, quietly, patiently, and with skill. The tattoo on his neck itched slightly under the collar, a reminder of heritage, strength, and a legacy long forgotten by most of the galaxy. One day, he knew, the secret would be revealed and the station would understand the hidden power of humanity. Until then, he would remain invisible, underestimated, but always prepared. Jan finished his shift, walking slowly through the now quiet corridors. His mop glided over the clean floors, the hum of the station comforting and steady. Ships docked and departed in silence, unaware of the danger that had passed. Aliens moved about, oblivious to the hero among them. He paused at a junction, listening to the quiet hum of systems and engines. The rogue faction had been thwarted, but they would return. Jan knew that, but so long as he was there, unseen yet vigilant, the station would have a protector few recognized. Humans were underestimated across the galaxy, but in truth they were clever, patient, and capable of extraordinary feats. Jan adjusted his collar, hiding the tattoo once more, and continued his rounds. The station was safe for now. He had acted decisively, intelligently, and without recognition. And that was exactly how he wanted it. The quiet power of a human, underestimated yet essential, continued to flow through the station. As the artificial night deepened, Jan paused for one last look out at the stars. They stretched endlessly, full of possibilities, dangers, and mysteries. Humans were small, easily overlooked, but enduring. And when the time came, they would rise, showing their worth to the galaxy. Jan's quiet actions today were only the beginning. The legacy of humanity, marked on his neck and in his mind, would one day be seen. Until then, he remained invisible, patient, and ready. The station felt tense. The calm that had settled over the corridors in the previous days was only temporary. Jan walked through the upper levels, mop in hand, alert to every sound, every flicker of light, and every movement. The rogue faction had not given up. Their attacks were growing bolder, more organized, and more dangerous. Jan could feel it. The station itself seemed to hum in warning, responding to the approaching storm. Earlier, small incidents had tested the station's defenses, but now the faction's plans had escalated. They were aiming for the central systems, the core power grid, communication hubs, and life support. Any disruption here could cause chaos on a massive scale. Jan paused near a reflective panel, adjusting his collar to hide the tattoo on his neck. Its intricate lines and ancient symbols had always been a secret, but the time was coming when it might be revealed, when humans would show the galaxy their true strength. Jan descended through maintenance corridors, unseen as always, moving with quiet purpose. He passed security teams rushing to minor emergencies, oblivious to the larger threat. He listened to the faint hum of energy lines, detecting subtle irregularities that indicated sabotage in progress. His eyes caught a flicker of movement ahead. A rogue operative slipped through the shadows, attempting to reach a vital system. Jan followed silently, planning his move. Timing was everything. The operative reached a control panel and began tampering with it. Sparks flew as the wires were forced out of place. Jan's hands moved with speed and precision. He reached the panel from behind, carefully rerouting power, correcting the sabotage, and stabilizing the system. The operative froze, realizing the human had anticipated the attack. Jan spoke softly. "You should have expected more." The being's eyes widened in shock, and it realized too late that it had underestimated him. Jan stepped aside, allowing security bots to apprehend the intruder. He watched silently, making sure the threat was neutralized. But this was only the beginning. The rogue faction had coordinated multiple attacks, and one major strike was still in progress, one that could cripple the station entirely. Jan knew he needed to act quickly. He moved through hidden corridors toward the central hub. The walls vibrated faintly with energy pulses, warning him of the instability ahead. As he approached, he saw multiple rogue operatives working to overload the core power grid. Sparks flew dangerously, alarms blared, and the hum of machines grew louder. The station teetered on the edge of disaster. Jan acted decisively. He moved into the hub, unseen by the operatives. Using his knowledge of the station's systems, he rerouted energy lines, disabled sabotage devices, and stabilized the power core. Sparks erupted, lights flickered, and alarms blared even louder, but Jan worked calmly and efficiently. Each action was precise, every movement calculated. One of the rogue operatives finally noticed him. It raised a weapon, aiming at him, but Jan did not flinch. Using quick reflexes and knowledge of the environment, he dodged and countered. The narrow corridor and careful timing gave him an advantage. In moments, the operative was disarmed and incapacitated, left unharmed but unable to continue. As Jan worked, another group of operatives entered from a side corridor. They were larger, stronger, and more aggressive. Jan's heart did not race. He analyzed their movements, predicting their attacks. Using the narrow space to his advantage, he neutralized them one by one, ensuring no permanent harm. The station's systems hummed steadily as he restored balance and prevented catastrophic failure. During the final confrontation, a sudden tug on his collar revealed the tattoo on the back of his neck. Light caught it for the first time, and its intricate symbols glowed faintly under the station's illumination. The rogue operatives froze, their eyes wide in disbelief. They had underestimated humans, assuming weakness and fragility, but now they saw something entirely different, a mark of legacy, skill, and hidden power. Jan straightened, his calm demeanor unchanged. "Humans are not as simple as you think," he said quietly. The words resonated with authority, with the quiet confidence of someone who had observed, endured, and acted with patience. The tattoo was a symbol of humanity's past explorers, those who had ventured into the stars long before most species on the station had existed. Its revelation now carried weight, authority, and warning. The rogue faction hesitated. Their attacks faltered. The humans' underestimated abilities, now visible and undeniable, changed the balance. Jan moved among them with precision, disabling remaining sabotage devices, rerouting critical systems, and restoring control. By the time security teams arrived, the rogue faction was neutralized, trapped, and confused. They had faced a human, and the result was not what they expected. Jan adjusted his collar, hiding the tattoo once more, but the effect remained. The operatives and even some security personnel had seen enough to understand that humans were capable of extraordinary skill, intelligence, and patience. Jan did not need accolades. Recognition was unnecessary. His duty was to protect, observe, and act when required, and he had done so flawlessly. After the threat had been fully neutralized, Jan walked through the restored corridors. The station buzzed with normal activity, unaware of how close it had come to disaster. Aliens passed him without noticing, carrying on their routines. Jan smiled faintly, appreciating the irony. Invisibility had always been his strength. Being overlooked allowed him to act where others could not. He paused at a quiet observation room, looking out at the endless stretch of stars. Ships glided gracefully through docking bays, and distant lights of other stations blinked across space. Humans were rare in these parts, and most species underestimated them. Yet here he was, one human, having saved thousands without anyone fully understanding how. The legacy of his kind was quiet, patient, and effective. Jan thought back to the tattoo, the symbol of human pioneers. They had ventured into unknown galaxies, faced danger and adversity, and left their mark quietly, unseen by most. That legacy now lived within him. The rogue faction had been clever, but their assumptions about human weakness had cost them dearly. Jan's actions had proven that patience, intelligence, and observation could outmatch brute force and deception. As night approached on the station's artificial schedule, Jan returned to his usual rounds. Minor malfunctions were corrected, corridors were cleaned, and the station's systems remained stable. His presence was still unnoticed, but that did not matter. Being invisible allowed him to protect without interference. Humans were often underestimated, but Jan embodied the truth. That strength could be quiet, power could be subtle, and intelligence could overcome even the most dangerous threats. Later, as he paused in a quiet hallway, an alien approached him cautiously. "Human, we saw what you did," it said softly, voice filled with awe. We didn't know." Jan nodded, adjusting his collar to hide the tattoo once more. "Humans are underestimated," he said simply. The alien stared, understanding dawning. It was the first acknowledgement Jan had received in a long time, and it mattered little in terms of fame, but greatly in terms of respect. The rogue faction's captured operatives were escorted to secure areas. Investigations revealed their plans, which would have caused massive chaos had Jan not acted. But the station's inhabitants largely remained unaware of the human janitor's central role. Jan did not mind. Recognition was not necessary. His satisfaction came from the safety and stability of the station, from fulfilling his purpose quietly and effectively. He moved through the corridors one last time before the end of his shift. The lights glowed softly, the hum of machinery steady, and the ships outside continued their routines. Jan's hands were steady, his mind alert, and his presence calm. The rogue faction had been thwarted and the station remained secure. The galaxy might not yet understand the full capability of humans, but Jan knew, and that knowledge, carried quietly and patiently, was a form of power all its own. In a reflective panel, Jan allowed himself a brief glimpse of the tattoo once more. The symbol glowed faintly in the dim light, a reminder of human legacy, ingenuity, and resilience. For centuries, humans had been overlooked and underestimated across the galaxy, but the truth remained. They were clever, enduring, and capable of extraordinary feats. Today, Jan had proven it, even if only to those few who had witnessed the faint glow of the mark. As he finished his rounds, Jan paused near the observation deck. Ships glided silently through space, and the stars stretched endlessly beyond the station's glass walls. He thought of the generations of humans who had ventured into the unknown, who had faced danger without recognition, and who had survived by intelligence, patience, and courage. Their legacy lived in him, quiet but powerful. Jan returned to the maintenance corridors, mop in hand, ensuring every detail was in order. The rogue faction's threat had been neutralized, but others might follow. He remained vigilant, prepared, and patient. Humans were underestimated, but they endured. They observed, they learned, and when the time came, they acted decisively. For now, the station was safe, systems stable, and lives protected. Jan moved quietly through the corridors, unnoticed by the many who walked past him. His presence was invisible, his influence profound. The tattoo on his neck remained hidden, but its legacy had been revealed through action. Jan paused one final time at a junction overlooking the docking bays. Ships moved, aliens passed, and the station continued its rhythm. He straightened, adjusted his collar, and took a deep breath. Today had proven that patience, intelligence, and human endurance could triumph even in the face of danger. The rogue faction had learned that humans were not to be underestimated, and John, the quiet janitor, would continue to be ready, vigilant, and unseen, until the galaxy finally understood the true power of his kind. With that, he moved through the corridors, mop gliding silently over the polished floors. The stars outside continued to shine, endless and untouchable, yet full of possibilities. Jan smiled faintly. Humanity had endured before, and it would endure again. And when the time came for the world to see, the tattoo on his neck would shine as a symbol of courage, intelligence, and the quiet strength that no one had expected from a human janitor.